Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change, collapse, extinction, etc. Wonderful, wonderful news. And I know, oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. So I just wanted to read a couple of articles, and this is probably going to be a short video because it's already late and then need to go to bed. Thank you. So this is from Inverse. Earth shatters climate record, sending planet toward worst case scenario.
What?
April 2018 was the 400th. Was the 400th consecutive month with above average temperatures on Earth, according to the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. To clarify, that means December 1984 was the last month the planet had below average temperatures. It also means we're headed towards a climate change of 2 degrees Celsius, a number that will have devastating effects on the Earth's biodiversity. As we have already seen, things are very, very bad at supposedly 1 degree. Not only has Earth reached the milestone of 400 consecutive months of heating up, but last April happened to be the 3rd warmest April ever recorded globally. According to the NOAA report released Thursday, carbon dioxide levels also hit another milestone by reaching the highest level in recorded history at 410 parts per million last month. With these new records behind us, scientists are now forecasting that the worst case scenario, one in which the planet heats up more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures by the end of the century, is more likely. That number isn't arbitrary. Limiting global warming to just 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures would limit the carnage that climate change has on Earth's biodiversity. A new study published in Science on Friday found that keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius would preserve tens of thousands of land-based species of plants, vertebrates, and insects living on the planet. Led by Rachel Warren, PhD of the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research, the study used a combination of climate simulations and data on more than 115,000 terrestrial species worldwide to observe how much warming each species could sustain. Warren found that if the planet were to experience warming of 2 degrees Celsius by 2100, 18% of insect species, 16% of plant species, and 8% of vertebrate species would see their geographic ranges shrink by more than half. However, just under 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, those numbers fell to 6% of insects, 8% of plants, and 4% of vertebrates. So this is kind of piggybacking on the study I was reading yesterday. The 195 countries that are still part of the Paris Agreement have committed to limiting global warming to well below the magic number of 2 degrees Celsius. It's good they're committed. However, scientific literature included in those accords contain few details about the effects of exceeding 2 degrees. With new data available, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is expected to convene in late 2018 to finalize a special report on the impacts of 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. However, even if all countries adhering to the Paris Agreement meet their targets without full cooperation in lowering greenhouse gas emissions, some projections estimate global temperatures could still rise by more than 3 degrees or 4 degrees Celsius by 2100. Given the 400-month warming streak, it's clear that the rate at which the planet warms to 2 degrees Celsius isn't slowing down. And that's that. It's clear that the rate at which the planet warms to 2 degrees Celsius isn't slowing down and possibly might be speeding up. As in, it is speeding up. I'm going to read one more article, and this is fairly long, so or long enough. So sit tight. This is from Activist Lab. Extinction versus collapse. Does it matter? April 27th, 2018. What decade is it? What century is it? Climate Twitter, the most fun Twitter, has recently been relitigating the debate between human extinction and mere civilizational collapse. I haven't seen this anywhere on Twitter, so I need to find me that climate Twitter and check it out. Between doom and gloom, despair, and kind of hope. It was sparked by an interview in The Guardian with acclaimed scientist Meyer Hillman. He argues that we're probably doomed, and confronting the likelihood that we're rushing toward collective death may be necessary to save us. Did I read this article? I believe that I did. The headline alone provoked a lot of reactions, many angered by the ostensible defeatism embedded in Hillman's comments. His stated view represents one defined camp that is mostly convinced of looming human extinction. It stands in contrast to another group that believes human extinction is highly unlikely, maybe impossible, and certainly will not occur due to climate change in our lifetimes. Collapse maybe, but not extinction. Who's more right? Let's take a closer look. First, the question of human extinction is totally bounded by uncertainty. There's uncertainty in climate data, uncertainty in models and projections, and even more uncertainty in the behavior of human systems. We don't know how well we will respond to the myriad impacts of climate change is beginning to spark, and we don't know how sensitive industrial civilization will be to those impacts. We don't really know if humans are like any other apex predators, highly sensitive to ecological collapse, or are among the most adaptable mammals to ever walk the earth. One may be inclined to lean toward the latter, given that humans have colonized every ecological niche on the planet except Antarctica. That bands of people can survive in and around deserts as well as the Arctic, as well as equatorial rainforests, speaks to the resilience of small social groups. It's why The Road, the movie The Road, is so disturbingly plausible. There could be a scenario in which basically everything is dead but people, lingering in the last gray waste of the world. On the other hand, we've never lived outside of the very favorable conditions of the Holocene, and past civilization and population collapses suggest humans are, in fact, quite sensitive to climatic shifts. Famed climate scientist James Hansen has discussed the possibility of Venus syndrome, for instance, which sits at the far end of the worst-case scenarios, as in the very worst-case scenario. While a frightening thought experiment, it is easily dismissed as it's based on so many uncertainties and doesn't carry the weight of anything near consensus. Just give it a little bit of time, and probably will have much more consensus. What's more frightening, it's this little weird mosquito right here, whatever that is. What's more frightening than potentially implausible uncertainties are the currently existing certainties. For example, ecology. The atmosphere has proven more sensitive to GHG emissions than predicted by mainstream science. We have a high chance of hitting 20C. Am I reading that right? 20C of warming this century. No, that can't be right. I think they're saying 2C. Could hit 1.5C in the 2020s. Worst case warming scenarios are probably the most likely. So yeah, we have a high chance of 2C, definitely. Massive marine death is happening far faster than anyone predicted, and we could be on the edge of an anoxic event. Ice melt is happening far faster than mainstream predictions. Greenland's ice sheet is threatening to collapse and already slowing ocean currents, which too could collapse. Which also means predictions of sea level rise have doubled for the century. Industrial agriculture is driving massive habitat loss and extinction. The insect collapse, populations declines of 75 to 80% have been seen in some areas. It's something no one predicted would happen so fast and portends an ecological sensitivity beyond our fears. This is causing an unexpected and unprecedented bird collapse. 1/8 of bird species are threatened in Europe. Forests Vital carbon sinks are proving sensitive to climate impacts. We are living in the sixth mass extinction, losing potentially dozens of species per day. We don't know how this will impact us and our ability to feed ourselves. Energy. Energy transition is essential to mitigating 1.5C warming. Energy is the single greatest contributor to anthro-GHG, and by some estimates, transition is happening 400 years too slowly to avoid catastrophic warming. Incumbent energy industries, that is oil and gas, dominate governments all over the world. We live in an oil oligarchy, a petrostate, but for the globe. Every facet of the global economy is dependent on fossil fuels, and every sector, far from construction to supply chains, to transport, to electricity, to extraction, to agriculture, and on, is built around fossil fuel consumption. There's good reason to believe fossil fuels will remain subsidized by governments beholden to their interests, even if they become less economically viable than renewables, and so will maintain their dominance. And this is why, take away fossil fuels and you get a good hearty collapse right away. We are living in history's largest oil and gas boom. Kilocalorie to kilocalorie, fossil fuel is extremely dense and extremely cheap. Despite reports about solar getting cheaper than fossil fuels in some places, non-hydrocarbon renewables are still a tiny minority, 2% of global energy consumption, and will simply always, by their nature, be less dense kcal to kcal than fossil fuels, and so will always be calorically more expensive. Energy demand probably has to decrease globally to avoid 1.5C. That's right on the money. Energy demand must decrease. What does that mean? And it's projected to dramatically increase. So we're going in the wrong direction. Getting people to consume less is practically impossible, and efficiency measures have almost always resulted in increased consumption. We're still setting fossil fuel emissions records. Politics. Conditions today resemble those prior to the 20th century's world wars. Extreme wealth inequality, rampant economic insecurity, growing fascist parties' sentiment, and precarious geopolitical relations, and the Thucydides trap. I don't know how to pronounce that word. That's a new one to me. Suggests war between Western hegemons and rising China could be likely. These two factors could disrupt any kind of global cooperation on decarbonization, and to the contrary, will probably mean increased emissions. The U.S. military is one of the world's single largest emitters of fossil fuels. Again, we will fight over every last drop of oil because we have to, because we must, unless somebody somewhere says, hey, I got a good idea. Let's just stop. But, psychopaths won't let that happen. Neoliberal ideology is so thoroughly embedded in our academic, political, and cultural institutions, and so endemic to discourse today, that the idea of degrowth, probably necessary to avoid collapse, as in absolutely necessary to avoid collapse, and solidarity economics isn't even close to discussion, much less realization, and for self-evident reasons, probably never will be. Living in a neoliberal culture also means we've all been trained not to sacrifice for the common good, but solving climate change, like paying more to achieve energy transition or voluntarily consuming less, will all entail sacrificing for the greater good. Humans sometimes are great at that, but the market fundamentalist ideology that pervades all social, commercial, and even self-relations today stands against acting for the common good or in collective action. There's basically no government in the world today taking climate change seriously. Yeah, and actually, to go back to that last paragraph, just, tell people that they shouldn't fly anymore and see how quickly they freak out. Oh, but what? I can't fly? Like, I can't go on vacation? I can't do this business trip? Like, what am I going to do? There's basically no government in the world today taking climate change seriously. There are many governments posturing and pretending to take it seriously, but none have substantially committed to full decarbonization of their economies. Iceland may be an exception, but Iceland is about 24 times smaller than New York City. So 25 years of governments knowing about climate change has resulted in essentially nothing being done about it. No emissions reductions, no substantive moves to decarbonize the economy. Politics have proven too strong for common sense, and there's no good reason to suspect this will change anytime soon. Wealth inequality is embedded in our economy so thoroughly and so indigenously to fossil fuel economies that it will probably continue, either causing perpetual strife as it has so far, or eventually cement a permanent underclass ruled by a small elite, similar to agrarian serfdom. There is a prominent view in left politics that greater wealth equality, some kind of eco-socialism, is a necessary ingredient in averting the kind of ecological collapse the economy is currently driving. Given that global fossil fuel capitalism by its nature consumes beyond carrying capacity, at least according to one NASA-funded study, the combination of inequality and ecological collapse is likely cause for civilizational collapse. Indeed. Yeah, you know, the more we try to say like, well, you know, technology is, you know, becoming more part of the economy, and, you know, so what are people going to do about jobs? We've got to give people money so they can just keep buying these products that we're churning out. I mean, that won't hasten an ecological collapse, will it? Even with this perfect storm of issues, it's impossible to know how likely extinction is, and it's impossible to judge how likely or extensive civilization collapse may be. We just can't predict how human beings and human systems will respond to the shocks that are already underway. We can make some good guesses based on history, but they're no more than guesses. Maybe there's a miracle energy source lurking in a hangar somewhere waiting to accelerate non-carbon transition, and maybe there is. Maybe there's a swelling political movement brewing under the surface that will soon build a more just, ecologically sane order into the world. I actually think that we're closer to that than a lot of people, but whatever. Community and energy programs are one reason to retain a shred of optimism, but also there's still a tiny fraction of energy. The reason why, though, that those maybe a swelling political movement will be shut down is because the media is controlled by the oligarchs, who are basically the oil industry, and they will do everything to shut that down. They're going to do everything to maintain the status quo for as long as possible until they can't. We just don't know how fast energy transition can happen, and we just don't know how fast the world could descend into climate-driven chaos, either by human strife or physical storms. What we do know is that, given everything above, we are living through a confluence of events that will shake the foundations of civilization and jeopardize our capacity to sustain large populations of humans. There's enough certainty around these issues to justify being existentially alarmed. Are y'all alarmed yet? At this point, whether we go extinct or all but 1,000 of us go extinct again, maybe that shouldn't make much difference. Maybe the destruction of a few billion or 5 billion people is morally equivalent to the destruction of all 7 billion of us, and so should provoke equal degrees of urgency. Maybe this debate about whether we go completely extinct rather than just mostly extinct is absurd. Maybe not. I don't know. What I do know is that regardless of the answer, there's no excuse to stop fighting for a world that sustains life. Indeed. Indeed, we should continue at least trying to alert people of what's going on. I know what a difficult mountain that is to climb, but climb we must. And that is all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your ears, your eyes, and your conscience. Sorry, this is a little bit shorter, but hopefully I will be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.